Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LCS 2024 Summer Split Playoff Primer video. Very excited to get into this. The Summer Split is officially over. The regular season is done and dusted, and it's time for us to jump into the coverage and the analysis of the playoffs. This is the most important part of the year for the LCS because they don't have a championship point system like every other major region does. Everything in terms of Worlds qualification is through this playoff bracket, and so very important for these teams to either live up to expectations or maybe try to exceed those expectations. If you haven't watched some of the videos I've done in this format for other regions, the LPL and the LEC ones that have already come out this year, first of all, check those out. They're very good videos if you are interested. But what we're going to do in today's video is not just go over the playoffs themselves, but kind of close the regular season out by giving my award picks for the regular season. That's going to be my MVP, my Rookie of the Split, and my 3 All-Pro teams. It's obviously going to be a pretty controversial video. Basically, anytime I give a strong opinion in a video, there's going to be quite a few people in the comment section that just disagree. And honestly, that's great. I love disagreements. I think it's great that, we can watch the same games and have slightly different opinions, or we can watch specifically a whole split and have slightly different opinions on how important or not important a player was, how impactful or not impactful a player was. This isn't some sort of binary, only one correct answer type of problem. And so I'm excited to have those conversations. If you agree or disagree with my opinions, feel free to let me know down in the comment section below. Of course, always the caveat, just be respectful about it. You guys with the LCS videos are typically very respectful about it. It's usually the other regions that I have to worry about a bit more, but I always like to say, if you have a different opinion from mine, that's great. I'm not trying to shun that in the video, even if you think that mine is stupid. As long as you're showing off that opinion in a constructive way down in the comments, then I'm always happy to see that, always happy to have those conversations, but we'll get into kind of the nitty-gritty of that when we get into the actual award selections. But of course, after that, we're going to be going over everything that has to do with the playoffs. That means we're going to start with the 2 teams that have a bye in the first round, the top 2 seeds, kind of talking about their play styles, what you can expect from them, whether or not they should be favorites or not favorites going into the tournament. And then, of course, we will be previewing our round 1 matchups. It's a very interesting bracket, and so at the end, we are going to do a full bracket prediction. Typically speaking, this is the thing that I am the least confident in, which is why I leave it to the end of videos. People like to skip around, and I understand a lot of people like to skip towards the full bracket prediction, but to me, the reason it goes last and not before any of the other bits of analysis is because it's entirely useless if you don't hear the context behind why I think certain teams might do well or poorly. Sometimes it is entirely matchup based. Sometimes I just think a team has some interesting features that might make them over or underperform what their regular season was. And so all of the context is going to come first, and then we will wrap everything up with a full bracket prediction. But I hope you guys are excited. That's a 3-minute intro. If you are, leave a like on this video. I usually never ask for that at the beginning of these videos, but these big primer videos that we do at the beginning and the end of splits, they take a lot of time to make, and I go back and watch basically almost every single game from the split in preparation to try to make my award picks. And so it really would mean a lot to me if you press that. Maybe not now, but if you're enjoying it in 5, 10, 30 minutes, it would really mean a lot. But that's enough wasted time at the start. Let's get right into it. Like I said, we're going to be starting off by closing out the regular season with my personal award picks, and we're going to start with the big ones, the individual awards, and there's no award bigger than most valuable player, MVP. Now, establishing my baseline for how I decide these awards, it's a lot more difficult in the LCS than it is in a lot of other regions because they only played 7 best-of-3s over the course of the entire regular season. A lot of these teams really didn't play that many games, and so it can be difficult to highlight like really, really big overperformers or really, really big underperformers. Obviously, there are some that are just more than others. I think that there are some pretty clear choices, but it certainly means that in comparison to some of the other regions that we've done for, the award picks like this, you're not going to get as much variance just because there's less to be variant about. Typically speaking, sometimes there are more, but if teams are just winning a lot of games and teams are losing a lot of games, it's hard to really shine in 7 series when you're losing all 7. So it can definitely be a little bit more homogenized than maybe some of the other regions, but I definitely still wanted to go for some spicy picks. If you don't know my grading scale, this is the same one that I've used for every other region. I value value what I consider to be how many wins you add to your team. That's kind of the thought process that I have going into this. How many wins do I think your team would have without you, and do I think you actively made your team better on the Rift? Remember, this is not a player rankings, especially the All-Pro. It's not a player ranking. I'm not saying that this player is individually always going to be better, or I project them to be better than the player that is below them. This is strictly off of what we saw on tape in the regular season. Nothing else was taken into account. And so those are kind of the caveats I want to go with at the start of this video. But for MVP, to me, value, I think, is a perfect term. Who did I think was the most valuable player to their individual team? Who raised the success rate of their team up the most in the regular season? Well, for me, I'm probably going to be sticking to the trend here. I think this is going to be pretty consensus. I'm going with Impact, the top laner for Team Liquid. His first MVP award, at least as far as I'm aware. I don't think he's won it in the LCS, but the fact that he's here is genuinely just incredible. We are 11 years removed from his World Championship on SKT in 2013. It is insane that he is still playing at such a high level, and for him to continuously feel like he's getting better and better, I felt like there was a little bit of a dip in quality in the middle there. As I talked about that final year on Evil Geniuses, that was not a particularly good year for Impact. I think some people just like to look at it through rose-colored glasses because he was so good before and so good after that, and he was even good for EG, specifically the year before that, but that final year on EG was like genuinely not good. He was getting absolutely trounced in lane. He goes over to FlyQuest. Obviously, last year was very strange for that entire team. For the most part, he was the bright spot, at least in the summer split. He was the only one attempting to do anything, and I think a lot of people were giving him praise for it. I've always said that Impact gets a lot more praise than other players who are of similar skill, just because he's Impact, he's super lovable, he's kind of a fan favorite, a veteran, and I agree with that still. I still think Impact probably gets a little bit more credit than maybe he deserves, as you can see with the fact that I gave him 2 less player of the series than the LCS broadcast ended up giving him, but I still think he was the most valuable player to his individual team this split. He was great in lane, he was even better out of lane. This was really just kind of the quintessential Impact kind of split, where he's playing Cassante, he's playing Ornn, and he's really able to take over a lot of games. That being said, he was able to actually carry through damage quite a bit more than he was asked to do at the very least on both Fly and on Evil Geniuses. He played a lot of Rumble over the course of this split, and I think that definitely increased some of the highlight plays from him generally. His team fighting was able to come out, and it really helped smooth over some of the laning phases, but his Cassante was really what kind of got him this MVP award. He is the best Cassante player in North America, and it's not particularly close. Impact was awesome to watch. I think his teammates were also very good, as you can see with one of my honorable mentions here. These are my runner-ups, my second and third place votes, if you will, but Impact was a pretty clear choice for MVP, and I think he will likely be rewarded with that on the broadcast as well. But my honorable mentions, my runner-ups, my second and third place votes. Second place is going to go to Inspired. I know that it's a bit of a sour taste right now because he was not very good in their final series of the year, but quite frankly, that was the only series all year long, or all split long, that he wasn't really great in for FlyQuest. Even in their losses, he was often the one that was attempting to try to make plays, and I've heard even Inspired doubters talk about, like, yeah, this was one of his better splits ever. I just think in terms of consistency, he was really high up there, and I think he added so much value to FlyQuest. I don't think Quad was exactly what they thought he was going to be from day one. He was basically identical to what I said and I thought he was going to be, and that meant Inspired had to do a lot more, I think, in the early game than anticipated, but it actually really worked out. Typically speaking, Inspired is actually pretty passive in terms of how he likes to play his early games. He's very much an objective-focused, team fight-oriented kind of jungler, and that means that oftentimes the early game can be a little bit harder for teams that he is on, but he really stepped that up this split, and I thought the consistency there, especially against bad teams, was really good. He still was good against the good teams, but that's kind of always been the case for him. He's just kind of taken some games off in the past, and I think keeping his foot on the gas is what got him this upper tier MVP vote for me. He's somebody that has been a bit of a channel darling in terms of, I've just praised him every year. I think his game is really good. And then APA is actually going to get my third place vote. I don't think this should surprise anybody. I don't know where he's going to stand in terms of public perception going into the end of year awards, but to me, we'll get into this. It's a bit of a spoiler for the All-Pros. He has very clearly been the best mid laner in North America over the course of this split. He has just been awesome in lane, out of lane. He's done everything that this team has asked him to do. He can carry, he can facilitate, he can be heavy resource, he can be low resource. He's honestly just grown into a super well-rounded, very dangerous mid laner to end up playing into. It's kind of hilarious that going into the year, the narrative was that he was kind of a one-trick, that he could only really play Ziggs or, you know, things like that, things of that nature, if you will. because at least in terms of what he's shown on the Rift over the course of this year, he's probably the most versatile mid laner in the entire region, not only in terms of champion pool, but also in terms of playstyle. And so you've got to be pretty impressed with him. I think that, having faith in him last year was really solid. I honestly kind of dropped some of that faith because I thought the team was really good around him in the spring split, but everything that's happened in the summer, this is the best case scenario for a player like APA. He has completely emerged, and so he's going to get my third place vote. Inspired is going to get my second place vote, and my pick for MVP is going to be Impact as my big major award, and quite frankly, the big guy deserves it. But then moving on to my other individual major award here, and that is going to be Rookie of the Split. I don't do Rookie of the Year. I think that that's kind of a weird way to look at it. The splits are just so different. I think I understand why they want to do Rookie of the Year, because there aren't exactly a ton of rookies, and generally one split is such a small sample size. But at least for me, I did Rookie of the Split in spring. I'm going to do it once again here in the summer. So just keep that in mind. This is entirely predicated and based off of the summer split. There is no spring split that is influencing this, which might definitely affect one of the players, which we will definitely talk about. But for me, this was kind of a two-horse race, and I ended up landing for my Rookie of the Split on Masu, the AD carry for FlyQuest. This definitely was kind of a debate in my head. It was either him or it was Thanatos, which we will get into as the runner-up, the honorable mention here, but I thought Masu was just a bit more consistent over the course of this split, and I really liked how he played down the stretch. I thought the bot lane continuously got better, and while Thanatos, I think, definitely also got better, he was really good down the stretch for the team. I think Masu just had a bigger role individually, and that led to me slightly edging him out in terms of the Rookie of the Split nod. I think it should be either him or Thanatos. There really is no other player that I think is even in the running, in my opinion, but let's talk about Masu. Obviously, I was crazy high on him coming into the year before he had played a single game in the LCS. I had him as the number 3 AD carry in the region just from his NACL tape. I genuinely thought he was that good, and while it's not necessarily always lived up to that, in fact, I thought his spring split was kind of overrated by the community. I didn't think he was actually particularly good. In spring, I thought Busio played pretty solid, and the rest of the team, especially the top side, was really strong in the spring split, but when things started to not be as consistent for that side, when Whippo had a much worse summer than he did a spring split, when Quad came in, and there definitely were some growing pains in terms of getting him used to playing some LCS action, at least at an aggressive pace, Masu was the player that was kind of stepping up and actually contributing a lot. So that felt like a relatively easy pick, at least for top 2, but again, the other player that I was kind of considering here was Thanatos, the top laner for Cloud9. He really was a lot stronger than I think I was anticipating, at least coming into the year. People were talking about him as if he was this generational top lane prospect. That's kind of been the narrative surrounding him for his time in the LCK Challengers League. As somebody who watches the Challengers League, I had said on multiple occasions, I think Thanatos is slightly overrated as a prospect. I think he's a very talented and very interesting top laner. His mechanics are very good, but sometimes he can really struggle, or at least he could really struggle to translate that into late game anything. Like, he can sometimes just be a little bit off kilter in terms of where he needs to go in the later half of the game. A lot of people thought that that could just be trained in, that could be fixed. I'm not so sure that that's as easy of a thing as people say it is to correct, but he came over here to North America, and at least at the start, it was exactly as we thought it would be. He was incredibly good in lane. He was dominating 1v1 and just really wasn't doing anything after that. He wasn't connected with the rest of the team, whether that was, just a communication problem in terms of him not, being able to communicate with the rest of the team as clearly as other people on the team were, or if it was a playstyle problem. It's hard to really know, but it did get better over the course of the split, which is massive, of course. Cloud9 has one of the best coaching staffs and one of the best infrastructure systems in the entire league, and so I'm not entirely surprised to see Thanatos get better over the course of this split, but he's gotten to the point now where I think you can genuinely consider him maybe the best top laner in North America, like in terms of talent, like 1v1 talent. Impact has obviously been phenomenal, but Thanatos is right up there, and genuinely, like, if they played right now, do I think that Thanatos would get wrecked by Impact? I don't think so. Like, I think Thanatos is at a point where I feel very good. If the start of his split was as strong as the end of it was, he probably would have won this award, but I thought Masu was just a bit more consistent, and like I said, I thought he had a bigger role individually on the team that he played on, and so Masu does edge him out just barely, but Thanatos was the other player that I was considering. And then the player that definitely dropped off the most from the spring version of these rankings is going to be Sniper, the top laner for 100 Thieves. Sniper was still okay over the course of this split, but certainly wasn't a star by any means. He had a much worse summer than he did spring. we thought there were going to be growing pains when it came to him individually as a player, but surprisingly, he was actually really good in the spring split. He picked everything up rather quickly. 100 Thieves themselves, of course, overperformed a lot, but things really fell off for the team. I think they just kind of came crashing back down to earth. I think we all expected that the form that they were in spring was not entirely sustainable, and that ended up being the case. Sniper, I think with better top lane talent in the league, ended up just kind of moving towards more of an average role in terms of the rankings. That's generally fine for 100 Thieves, and that's still good enough to get him third place in terms of these rankings and in terms of these votes, but it just wasn't enough for me to consider him in the upper echelon. I thought Thanatos was certainly better as a top laner, and Masu definitely played a bigger role on a better team, and so I felt pretty confident with my top 2 votes, but Sniper just barely sneaking in here. Again, if this was a Rookie of the Year vote, which I think it is on the broadcast, then Sniper should be a lot higher than this. In fact, I think he should be in the running to win it because he was that good in the spring split, and, you know, you had the double round robin, it was over a longer stretch, more patches. I think that definitely plays into it at the very least a little for me, but if you're just looking at summer, which is what I'm doing here, I just do not think he's in the running. Thanatos came close, but Masu is going to be my choice for Rookie of the Split, and we all could have kind of predicted that at the beginning of the year. But then, now that we've wrapped up our major individual awards, it's time to move on to my All-Pro list. These are going to be the final awards that we go through here from the summer split. And again, I really want to reiterate some of the criteria that I'm going to be using to determine the All-Pro teams. It's not always just going to be who was the best player on the best team. Oftentimes, less so in the LCS, but at least globally, we'll see All-Pro teams kind of be decided based off of the standings rather than actually on any individual gameplay. And so I've really wanted to try to buck that trend. Now, I do think that has gotten better for a lot of the regions in the last couple of years. I still don't think it's perfect, but it certainly isn't as bad as like 2022, where the LCK essentially just gave 3 teams all pros with, you know, the best team getting all of the first team, the second best team getting all the second team, etc. Right now, I think there is a lot more nuance to the conversation. I think generally the conversation has become a lot more variant, and so I'm not quite as off kilter with a lot of the consensus opinions here, but I do want to go back and, you know, talk once again about where my criteria is. It's the same criteria as me choosing MVP or Rookie of the Split. The question I asked myself is, who do I think added the most amount of wins to their individual team over the course of this split? I definitely think there are going to be at least a couple of controversial opinions, because I think generally in North America, things have actually gone relatively stock standard over the course of this split, which means that now there are randos coming out that are attempting to say that players are overrated or underrated purely because there is not a lot of discussion happening. And I think, you know, people will just kind of make stuff up because they're bored in a lot of cases. I'm not trying to say that that's the entirety of the discussion, but certainly some of that falls into it. Generally speaking, there aren't going to be a ton of upsets for me on this list. I think this is going to be, at least, if not exactly the same as what the broadcast does, probably pretty darn close, if only because, again, shortened regular season, not really a lot of games to talk about, really not a lot of weird opinions. Just, there are a lot of players that played well and a lot of players who didn't play well, and so the league kind of got split in half because of that. That being said, you might see more of the top teams than you normally would on a list like this for some of the other regions. Typically speaking, I'm pretty happy to put players from like bottom tier teams, even teams that have missed the playoffs before, on my all-pro lists, but it just didn't really break down like that in the LCS this split, spoiler alert, and so, you know, maybe not the weirdest list of all time, but I definitely wanted to do that caveat at the beginning. But with that out of the way, let's jump right into it. Let's jump into my first team All-Pro for the LCS in summer of 2024. It's up on the screen now. We'll go over it very quickly. In the top lane, it's Impact from Team Liquid. In the jungle, it's Inspired from FlyQuest. In the mid lane, it's APA from Team Liquid. In the bot lane, it's Yawn from Team Liquid. And in the support position, it's Vulcan from Cloud9. 3 teams represented here in first team. This was about as variant as I think I could generally possibly go. There was a long stretch here where I actually just had all of Team Liquid in first team, where Umti was definitely considered a little bit less than maybe Inspired, but obviously Core JJ was definitely considered for first team All-Pro, but I definitely landed on this. I really think the only position here that's even up for debate, in my opinion, is AD Carry, where I think we'll talk about kind of the second team All-Pro player in just a second. I think they have an argument that they could be first team, but to me, this is the highest performing first team All-Pro. I think that these are clearly the players that I think were the most consistent in their roles throughout the split. I've already talked about all of the top 3. Impact, obviously, my MVP. It would be pretty critical criminal if he wasn't first team All-Pro. That's not how it works. If you're the MVP, you're first team All-Pro. You're the best player in the league. You're the best player in your position. That's just how that goes. But we also had two other players that got, honorable mentions, runners up for the MVP. Inspired, obviously, getting second place for me. He was the best jungler in the league for me. This was a relatively close conversation, if only because of the final series of the year for FlyQuest. It definitely kind of was a little bit of an eye-opener, and I was like, do I move Inspired down? Is this enough of a push to kind of move him? But I feel like that would be ignoring the first half of the split just a little bit too much. Not even the first half. The first, 6/7 of the split, he was the best jungler in the league, and that's why he is going to get first team All-Pro, as I already talked about. APA, I think, has been the most consistent mid laner in the league. I think he's been the best mid laner in the league. His laning has been very good, but his team fighting is genuinely elite, and especially in this meta right now where AD carries are prominent in the middle of the map, you have to be one of the elite team fighters in order to be really successful in the mid lane right now. I think Team Liquid actually played through APA a lot more than people give them credit for, and he was really good over the course of this split at being able to make the most out of basically any situation. So those three I felt were very obvious, but the bot lane, definitely the more up in the air ones. Yawn is definitely one that maybe is going to get some pushback. I've actually seen quite a bit of Yawn hate over the last couple of days, not only here in the comment section, but on Reddit, on Twitter. I don't get this. To me, at least in my opinion, this is the result of things going stock standard, of Team Liquid being undefeated, people just looking for a reason to dislike someone in the league. They've just seen Yawn and they go, well, his job's really easy. That must mean he sucks. I don't think that's how that works. This guy is up 1.5k gold every laning phase and just never looks back. There is not a better laner regardless of position in the LCS, in my opinion. I just don't think there's anyone that's actually able to dominate their individual lanes and win pre-10 minutes harder than Yawn is able to. A lot of people are giving credit to Core JJ. I just don't know where that is on the tape. I get it, Core JJ's a big name, but I can't watch these games and sit here and be like, oh, it's Core that's winning these laning phases. You go and watch the 2v2s, you can isolate the camera, and you can see Yawn just dominating. You can see him applying so much pressure. It's just crazy. I don't think that this is uncalled for by any stretch, and to me, at least at the current moment, it's pretty clear that he's the best performing AD carry in North America. And then the support I went with was Vulcan. What a bounce back split. I think this is actually probably going to happen. It seems public sentiment has actually flipped entirely back around on Vulcan. And I'm really happy to be able to say that because it really felt like he was on kind of a downswing over the last couple of years. Of course, the FlyQuest tenure really wasn't good at all. That entire team was a bit of a disaster, but it really wasn't one player's fault, even if he was maybe the worst player on that team during that era. But then he comes over to Cloud9 here in the spring, and honestly, he's not better. He's pretty bad in the spring split. The Cloud9 bot lane regresses quite a bit. Berserker looks a lot worse, and I think a lot of people were pointing fingers at Vulcan, saying that he could potentially be the culprit for that. I think it's nice to see the summer split come around and both of them get back on track, and Vulcan in particular really kind of be the star of Cloud9 for parts of this split. I think Thanatos, Blabber, Berserker, they've all had times, maybe not as much JoJo, but they've all had times during the summer split where they've kind of been the guy for Cloud9, but the one that I'm looking at in terms of consistency really is Vulcan. I do think he's been C9's best player over the course of this split, and so he's going to get that first team All-Pro nod. Definitely some interesting picks. Again, I'm interested to see if this is more standard or if people disagree with these. I really don't know where people stand in terms of the LCS All-Pros because of how limited the games were, but these were the players that I considered to be the best in their roles across this split, but that's really it for the first team. But that means we can now move on to my second team All-Pro here in the summer split, and this one is definitely kind of the remnants of the first team. I think that there is a bigger separation between second and third than there is between first and second. These are all still very good players, and some of them do have arguments to be first team All-Pro, but I ended up landing with second team here for them. It's going to be in the top lane, Thanatos from Cloud9, in the jungle, Blabber from Cloud9, in the mid lane, Quid from 100 Thieves, in the bot lane, Berserker from Cloud9, and at support, Core JJ from Team Liquid. C9 really populating a lot of this second team. It makes sense. They were the second best team in the league, and so oftentimes a lot of those players were good, but maybe not quite as good as the Team Liquid players. I think that that is the case in a couple of these positions, but some players sneaking in here. Quid's definitely going to be one that I'm interested to see the feedback on, but let's start with the Cloud9 players, starting with Thanatos in the top lane. Some people might be confused to see Thanatos here on second team and no Masu yet, even though I put Masu as my rookie of the split over Thanatos. pretty simple. I just think that AD carry is a bit deeper at the top level. It's a bit more top heavy than top lane is at the current moment. I think that, you know, both of those positions are rather weak at the LCS level, at least in terms of depth at the current moment, but I don't think that there was another top laner that felt like they dominated more than Thanatos did over the second half of the split. He got better and better and better and more comfortable every single game, which makes a lot of sense when you're doing the scouting report on Thanatos. I know I talked a lot about the fact that I was a lot lower on him in terms of his tape in the Challengers League. As somebody who watches that league incredibly regularly, I saw a high mechanical player, somebody who was ridiculously talented, that had really no idea what to do in the later half of the game, and that wasn't entirely dissimilar to what we saw here on Cloud9, but I think generally speaking, he got much better at team fighting when he came over here to North America. I think the coaching definitely helped him a lot more than I was anticipating, and even if I was lower on him as a prospect, honestly, he was basically everything I could have asked him to be. I think a lot of people were maybe expecting him to come in and dominate the league. Those expectations were always just going to be too high. He wasn't berserker in terms of a prospect, even if everybody in the LCK ecosystem would like to make you believe that. Again, so many people talking about how high the potential is for Thanatos, having never watched him play before he came over here to the LCS. As somebody who watched basically every game, he was the number 2 top laner in the Challengers League behind Perfect, at least in terms of actual results, and that was good. This is essentially what I expected to see from him. A very good split, and one that helped Cloud9 quite a bit, and if he can continue to get better, he can grow into being that superstar that ends up dominating the league, the level that Berserker did last year. But speaking of Berserker, we'll kind of jump to him next. I know it's a bit out of order, but we'll jump to him next because it's interesting. He was another player that I was very much considering for that first team. It was really between him and Jan. I think if you want to switch them, you absolutely can. Whether or not you want to think that Jan being able to win lane as consistently as he was able to do is more important than Berserker probably being the best team fighting AD carry in the region, it's all really up to your personal preference at that point. I think Jan was just a little bit more consistent, and so I gave the nod to him, but Berserker deserves quite a bit of praise. I just think, again, if he had played the way that he did over the course of like the last 3 to 4 weeks for all 7 weeks, then he probably would have gotten first team. But it wasn't like it was a tremendously slow start, just like an average start that built into a very great split. And honestly, I thought Vulcan was incredible over the course of this split. I think he helped out Berserker's game quite a bit. Vulcan was really like a big game changer for Cloud9, and that was also kind of a determining factor for me. So Berserker gets second team, but honestly, he is basically equal in terms of, you know, points with Jan. It's just whichever one you want to have preference towards. And then their teammate Blabber is going to get second team. For a lot of the split, he was in the running for like an MVP finalist position, but ended up falling out of that just in terms of, you know, other players on C9 standing out a bit more over the course of the second half of the split. But I continue to think that Blabber is underrated by the community as a whole. Oftentimes, we just get swept up in the idea that Blabber is over-aggressive and he's not perfect in every team fight, but for 90% of his games, he's so far ahead when we get to 15 minutes that it genuinely just doesn't matter. I think he's not quite as flashy as maybe he was last year or 2 years ago, or even going back to 2020 or 2021, right? Like, those are incredibly flashy, incredibly dominant, carry-oriented MVP caliber seasons. This was just more of a very great season from Blabber where he fit the team very well and allowed everybody to kind of do their jobs. He had his moments where he looked amazing, but I honestly, again, think that he's somehow underrated still by the LCS community as a whole. But we've also got Core JJ here, kind of one of the last players of Team Liquid to talk about, as we talked about most of them in the first team. I thought Core was really good. I do think that he's going to get a bit overrated because of his name. The engages really weren't all there. I think that there were games that he was just genuinely bad in, and it didn't really matter because the rest of the team was winning. Don't get me wrong, there were some games where he was awesome, where he was incredible, and there are going to be a lot of haters in terms of this list that point to those games and talk about how Core was amazing, and they'll point out individual plays where he looked incredible. I'm certainly not going to deny that. He's second team All-Pro for a reason. It's just, from a game-to-game consistency standpoint, he had significantly more bad games than someone like Vulcan, and so that just stood out a bit more to me, and that's why he does fall down here to second team. But again, it's pretty up in the air. Originally, I had him on first team because Team Liquid did probably have the best bot lane in the region across this split, and so I feel pretty good about, you know, Core moving up or down if you really want to have him there, but for me, he comes in just below in the second team. And then Quid, he's one of the only players not in an upper tier team to make this list. 100 Thieves had a very weird split. I think they crashed back down to earth, as I said, kind of the expected outcome going into summer, but Quid was still really important for them. I think he was a big innovator in terms of the early split adaptation towards AD carries in the mid lane. A lot of mid laners were really slow on the uptake in terms of picking those champions outside of like Corki, but, you know, picking things like Ezreal and Zeri, you know, Quid was really quick on that, and I think it really helped this team out at the start. I think a lot of people are going to point to the fact that 100 Thieves was very inconsistent, but I think they win 0 games this split without Quid. Maybe not 0, but it certainly becomes a lot more difficult to win without Quid in the mid lane. I think he was definitely the driving point. That being said, Tomo might take over that main carry spot. He's definitely had a lot more resources than Quid since he's joined the team, whether that's because he's new and they want to integrate him well, or because that's the direction they want to move into the future. You know, we'll have to see, but at least in terms of what we saw for most of the split, I think 100 Thieves would have been a significantly worse team without Quid in the mid lane, and for that, he's going to get my second team all-pro nod, especially in a year where I don't think a ton of the mid laners like really stood out in terms of dominating, so feel pretty good about that. But that's my second team. It's time to move into the third and final one. And that third and final one is going to be up on the screen now. It's my third team All-Pro, and this kind of rounds everything out. We'll go through all of the players here. In the top lane, it's going to be Bwipo from FlyQuest. In the jungle, it's going to be from Team Liquid. In the mid lane, Jensen from Dignitas. In the bot lane, Masu from FlyQuest. And in the support position, Busio from FlyQuest. I think this is the most fair way to end out the rest of this list. A couple of these players, obviously quite a few of them are from FlyQuest. I do not feel good about being on the third team. Quite frankly, for a couple of these positions, finding 3 players that I felt good about getting an all-pro nod is crazy impossible. Like, it's very difficult to end up doing, but this is what I ended up landing on, so we'll go ahead and talk about it. Let's talk about first. I still think is just kind of a part of the process here. I'm like the facilitative jungle guy. I'm sure I'm going to get some comments that like, oh, you just don't get how important is to the team because he plays Maokai and Sejuani, and you can't really see how much that impacts the game as a whole. You're preaching to the choir, man. I'm the guy who dies on a hill for Tarzan and for Peanut and for Karsa, and so trust me, like I understand where is coming from as a player. I just don't think that the plays that he's making are particularly special. I think he's really helped out by the fact that every single one of his laners is always winning. Impact is the best top laner in the league 1v1. APA has been really good in the 1v1 in the mid lane. Yan and Core are by far the best 2v2 bot lane. It makes his early game so easy. He can literally do whatever he wants, basically regardless of the draft, and generally I just don't think anything he's doing is particularly special. Now, that's not to say if he was asked to do something more that he couldn't. We saw last split in the playoffs that he was integral towards their playoff run. I just don't think he was asked to do that all that much over the course of this split, and that lands him on the third team. That being said, there certainly was not a jungler that was more valuable than him that did not get on this list. Again, finding 3 players of a certain position that were all pro caliber was really, really tough. Like, there were basically every position with the exception of AD carry. It was basically impossible to find 3 players that actually played well for a majority of the split. And so is going to get it here, even if I think in a normal year he probably wouldn't, just because I wasn't like ridiculously enthused by the way that he played the game. And then you've got a bunch of FlyQuest players. I think Masu and Busio are pretty obvious. This one really doesn't feel bad at all to me. Busio is definitely more on the fringe, but I actually think he was generally fine. Generally good, even, really, over the course of this split. And Masu, obviously, somebody who I think got better in summer, certainly had a bigger role, but I think lived up to it and certainly did kind of start showing a lot of that promise we were all expecting. I've already talked about Masu a bit, but Busio was very solid. Again, playing a lot of engagers. I think he's gotten more comfortable in the 2v2 and something that he has gotten a little bit more adjusted to at the LCS level. It was something he was struggling with when he was playing with 100 Thieves, so it's nice to see that outside of just this roaming teamfight playstyle, he can actually still be very relevant. The one I feel weird about is Bwipo in the top lane. Bwipo did not play an all-pro caliber game over the course of this split, but like genuinely, who else do I put here? If you can give me a name that you feel like is more deserving, then go right ahead, but I certainly can't think of one. I do not think Licorice played particularly well this split. Sniper was significantly worse, and he got destroyed in a couple of laning phases. Dokla, not particularly good here. Fake God was awesome the last 2 to 3 weeks, but was awful the first 3 weeks of the split. Like, genuine Castle, like, who are we putting here? Like, genuinely, who's taking this number 3 spot? And so at the end of the day, I ended up going with Bwipo because at the very least he was good in the team fighting stage, and I do think he probably was the best of the others, but quite frankly, nobody after the top 2 top laners were valuable at all to their individual teams. It just wasn't that kind of meta, and certainly the LCS didn't play into that, really. Again, if maybe even Fake God, like, if you really wanted to give this to Fake God, honestly, he's the only player that I think has even a conversation, like a justifiable conversation to be in this, and that's only because he had like 2 to 3 series down the stretch of the year that were really good, even if there were like 4 or 5 at the start of the year that were really awful. And so whatever you really want to do is kind of up to you on this one. I'm certainly not going to die on a hill for Bwipo. I think this split was way worse than his spring split where he was like an MVP caliber player. This split, he was basically invisible and honestly kind of a nuisance at times for his own team. And so whatever you want to say, like whoever you want to put on third team here, I'm certainly not going to argue. The mid lane one, I'm going to give it to Jensen. I feel feel kind of bad that Jensen is the only dig rep on this list because I think Sven was really good over the course of this split, but like I said, I just think AD carry was the most concrete position. Sven was definitely the biggest snub, in my opinion, off of these all-pro rankings. I thought he was very good over the course of this split, but Jensen, I thought, was the one that really stepped up in their wins quite a bit more, and so he's going to get that third-team all-pro nod in the mid lane. Again, I just really wasn't all that impressed with players like Quad, who does end up like getting snubbed here. Jojo Pune, I think, is technically a snub, although I don't think a lot of people are going to be going to bat for him after the split that he had. I just think Jensen was better than both of them in terms of actively winning games for their team. Maybe that's a statement. I'm really not trying to make one. People are going to run with, oh, he put Jensen over Quad. That means something. I'm not trying to make it mean something. I just think Jensen did a great job of actually being able to close out games for Dignitas, whereas Quad was on a very good team that oftentimes was playing through either an inspired win condition or a bot lane win condition, and so he ends up getting left off the list. But those are my all-pro rankings. Again, Sven is really the one player that I feel is the biggest snub. There really aren't a ton of other snubs, if you will, in other positions. I guess Quad is really the other one that you would definitely point out, but that's just personal preference. Let me know who you think I left off of this list, who got snubbed by me, who you think deserves to be above anybody that I listed. Again, I'm sure we're going to have different opinions. There is absolutely no way I went 15 for 15 in terms of what your predictions are, whoever you are, down in the comments. So let me know what you agree with or disagree with. Just be courteous about it. Obviously, being constructive about the conversation is a lot better than just yelling at me. But again, typically you guys here with the LCS videos do that rather well. So that's the end of my all-pro teams. It's time to now wrap up the regular season and get into my playoff analysis. And of course, kicking off our playoff coverage means we get to talk about the teams individually. We're not going to get to the matchups just yet. We're going to save that for after we cover the teams with a bye week because the top teams in the league don't have to play in round number 1. That's how it ends up going with the format. It's a pretty big advantage. They only have to win one series in order to qualify for the World Championships, which is a pretty nice gig to end up having, and they've earned it. We'll just say the top 2 teams in the league were clearly the top 2 in the regular season, and that very much kicks off with our number 1 seed going into the playoffs, and that is the undefeated Team Liquid. It's 7-0 in terms of their series score in the regular season. They have yet to drop a best of 3. They lost 3 games, but like, come on. They went 14-3 in the regular season. That's still pretty darn good. Team Liquid is the scariest team in North America. They are the favorites for the playoffs, heading in for basically everyone, and it's going to be interesting to see if they can repeat their spring success. Remember, their playoff success in spring was kind of a surprise. They were not that good in the regular season. They were 500. They were a team that I personally had basically no faith in going into the playoffs. It felt like they really didn't have any sort of locked-in play style, and everything just kind of clicked together as they went into the playoffs, and they've never really looked back since. I give a lot of that credit to the coaching staff, who has just made this team better game after game after game, but obviously, these players have evolved quite a bit as well. You can see on the screen quite a few things. Of course, the record. You can see game duration, first blood percentage, dragon percentage, gold diff at 15, all of those, and their ranks in terms of where they qualify 1 through 8 in the league. Team Liquid's first in basically everything because they're the best team. Of course, every single player with, a number or, a phrase next to them to determine where they were in my all-pro rankings, or, in Impact's case, he's the MVP, and then their 3 most played champions over the course of the split. We'll go ahead and go over Team Liquid here. We're going to talk about their play style. We're going to talk about where I think they're going to be looking to get their advantages. It's unfortunate that Team Liquid starts us off because honestly, they can get their advantages anywhere. They're just so well-rounded across the board, and that's what makes them so dangerous. But their lineup is, of course, looking like Impact in the top lane, T in the jungle, APA in the mid lane, Yawn at AD carry, and Core JJ at support. I do want to make like a quick PSA to Riot, and I've tweeted this out before, but please, somebody update these headshots. Like, somebody have a media day where we can get like a headshot of someone like T actually in a Team Liquid jersey, or Impact not in a FlyQuest jersey. APA's is from the NACL. Like, these are very outdated headshots. I'm begging y'all, please update them. If there's anybody who can contact the LCS who's watching this, please, God, help me get some headshots in here. But that's besides the point. Let's talk about Team Liquid individually, of course, as a team. What do they do well? What do they not do well? Well, this, like I said, is a very well-rounded team. They're kind of the jack-of-all-trades team in the LCS. They kind of do a little bit of everything. I think when you're looking at their ability to win early, they do that mostly through the bot lane. Yawn is, as I said, probably the best laner of anybody in the LCS, regardless of position. He's just so consistently able to win regardless of the matchup, whether he's playing Ezreal or Lucian or something that is supposed to be able to win early, Misfortune, or something like a Zeri, where he's supposed to scale. Smolder was kind of the famous thing for them last split. All of that ended up working because it didn't really matter if he was playing something scaling, he was going to win 2v2 anyways, and that's a really big plus to him. That was a big strength of his in the NACL or in Academy as well. He understands how to win the 2v2. It's something that he has always been really good at. Honestly, reminds me quite a bit of like peak FBI from a couple of years ago on 100 Thieves, where it just doesn't really matter what they draft. That's going to be a strength. So that's a massive positive. Obviously, Core JJ helps out with that quite a bit, specifically when he's on things that aren't more roam-oriented. Obviously, that's more of a comfortable play style for him. That's when he was really taking over as an MVP caliber player, is those metas where he was just moving around the map constantly, but he can play the 2v2 very well. He's gotten better at it over the years, and it's really peaked so far this year, where he's been a great support in terms of the 2v2, even if I think Jan has been more important towards that success. But it takes two to tango in the bot lane, as they say. But Impact is obviously the other player that you're looking at. He's been great in lane over the course of this split. Historically, that's not always been the case. He's always been a little bit worse at laning than he is at team fighting. He's always been more of a scaling type of player. Now, if he can keep up the lane dominance that he's had over all of 2024, essentially, that's going to be massive for Liquid. There's really not going to be a lot of ways for other teams to be able to answer that, because as we covered in the All-Pro standings, there's really not a lot of top laners that are playing well at the current moment, and so Impact might be in a really good position to just punish that really heavily, as he's done for basically all of the regular season. But he's going to be a great team fighter, and then you've got APA in team fights as well. He is kind of that, slow scale, play for 5v5s type of player. It's why he likes Corki. It's why, the Ziggs obviously was something he liked going towards. He wants to be the front-to-back carry, and that really fits for this team because you've got Jan and you've got Impact, who can take more of those resources in the early game, and then you have a jungler in Umti who's more than happy to play things like Maokai and Sejuani. In fact, that's what he's most comfortable on, regardless of what the meta is, and so you can get those tank junglers that are going to help out in that phase of the game, and then you could put APA on Corki, and he can pop off and dominate games, as he's done multiple times over the course of this split. I think it's a really well-constructed roster. You have players that are good at taking resources, but nobody really needs them because they're all good enough if you're able to isolate their matchups, and all of them are good enough in teamfights to be able to make it work. Really, the only concern in teamfights is maybe Jan. At times, he can overstep and be a little bit too aggressive because of the confidence he's gotten, but honestly, as a team fighter, he's developed so much. He's gotten so consistent in that phase of the game. The other main concern is Umti's early games aren't exactly great. I think in a different circumstance, that could potentially be a problem, but again, if you have 3 winning lanes, it pretty much doesn't matter like what you do early game in the jungle if your lanes are just absolutely dominating like they often do here for Team Liquid. So, I feel very confident in this team. They proved over, FlyQuest in week 1 and more notably over Cloud9 in week number 6 that they are the best team in the LCS, and nobody's really been able to even come close to touching them. They've been able to drop games here or there, every once in a while, but nothing actually concrete. They're just the most well-rounded team, and they're going to be favorites for a reason. And then moving on to our second team that has a bye in round number 1, and it's the number 2 seed, and the team that came at least kind of close to being able to get that undefeated split. It's Cloud9 coming in as the number 2 seed. Of course, they are the second best team pretty clearly in the LCS after taking down FlyQuest in the final week of the regular season. They were really the big contenders for that number 2 spot, at least in terms of expectation in the power rankings. And this roster on paper continues to be one that has limitless upside, especially at the domestic level if everything were to come together. It's been a little bit scattered throughout the year, but I think generally speaking, there is a world in which all of these players can come out of the playoffs playing the best league, the best version of the league that they've played over the course of this year, and that can get them a championship. That is good enough for them to beat a team like Team Liquid if it all comes together at the same time. But that's really been the question, hasn't it? It's always been one player on this team or 2 players on this team that are going through a bit of a struggle or trying to find themselves in a smaller role, and it's just not necessarily worked out for them like we anticipated. Their lineup is, of course, looking like Thanatos in the top lane, Blabber in the jungle, Jojo Pune in the mid lane, Berserker at AD carry, and Vulcan at support. This is, on paper, again, maybe the strongest roster ever in NA, and, their successes have come from that. You're talking about Blabber constantly being able to get early game leads and being really good at securing them, even if he has been inconsistent at times in the mid to late game. You're talking about Berserker and Vulcan really getting back online and becoming one of the scarier bot lane duos, specifically in the back half of games where they've really been able to take over a lot of the team fights. You're talking about Thanatos coming along and, as I said, getting better and better over the course of the split, going from a player that was essentially only good in lane, was really strong in lane, but wasn't transitioning it into anything in the mid to late game, to actually linking up with the rest of this team and feeling a lot more comfortable with the game plan in general. All of those things have become true for Cloud9, and that's the reason they're sitting at 6-1. They've lost the same amount of games as Team Liquid over the course of this split. They had only lost 1 game outside of their series against TL. That's pretty darn impressive, and I think people are underestimating this team a little bit. I think we saw in that series, the Team Liquid Cloud9 series from a couple of weeks ago, that honestly, I don't think these teams are bad. Like, I don't think Cloud9 is a bad team. I don't think NA is just one of those regions where anyone can win. I think it's Cloud9 actually being a genuine threat. The biggest concern for them has so far in the summer split been Jojo Pune in the mid lane. I never thought I was going to say that. He was amazing, like an MVP caliber player for them in the spring split when everything else was kind of going wrong. Him and Blabber were definitely playing off of each other well. It felt like they had great chemistry when they first started playing together, but as we've stated, Fudge was not so good in the top side, definitely his weakest split ever, so much so that it got him replaced, and Berserker and Vulcan were really off in the bot lane. To me, that was the biggest problem for Cloud9, is they had absolutely no pressure coming from the bottom of their map. Vulcan was horrible in late game fights, constantly getting caught out, and Berserker just wasn't actively winning games. He was like an average AD carry, which is certainly not good enough, and so Cloud9 ended up not really living up to the expectations and just being the number 3 team in North America. But even at their worst, they were still a top 3 team, and they have only gotten better. If Jojo can get back to the form that he was at in spring, if him and Blabber can get on the same page again and actually play super aggressive in the early to mid game and be able to really channel a lot of that pressure through the middle of the map, I genuinely think this team might be the favorites. Like, that is something that if it happens, I just don't really see a weakness for them. Now, will that come at the cost of one of these members, you know, kind of retreating back into where they were? Are Berserker and Vulcan looking a lot better because they're receiving more attention from Blabber and generally from the team as a whole? Maybe. Is Jojo already receiving a lot of attention and already not doing anything with it? Is it foolish to expect him to turn it around? Maybe, but I'm just throwing out possibilities. I'm not trying to sit here and say that Cloud9 will win or that they should be favorites, but they could win. Like, they absolutely should be treated as a team that is dangerous, and I just think there is a large contingent of people that say it's Team Liquid's league and there's no one that's even close to be able to competing with them in it, and I just don't agree with that. Again, Berserker and Vulcan have been excellent. Thanatos has really come along as a late game team fighter, and it's all really going to be up to Jojo. If he's going to be able to take some of the resources that he's able to get from jungle and translate that into actual mid-game pressure, it's a wrap. Like, this team is ridiculous, and so you're hoping you can get the best version of them. You're hoping you're getting a complete version of C9, but even the version of them that you've been getting in summer where Jojo's really not at his best and not playing particularly well, that's probably still a finals team, and I think Cloud9 would be really happy so long as they're going to Worlds. But now that we've covered the 2 teams that have a bye in round number 1, we get to jump into our matchup analysis for said round number 1. There's really no point in talking about the rest of the teams in the playoffs individually, because it doesn't matter how good or bad they are individually. It's more so about whether or not they can get past their current opponent. And so we're going to be covering them in the lens of their matchup against their first round opponent. Of course, we'll be talking about their playstyle and all the things we said about the 2 teams with a bye. It's just all going to be within the context of who they are playing off against. And we're going to start with our highest versus lowest seed in round number 1. It's the number 3 seeded FlyQuest taking on the number 6 seeded NRG. And this feels like a pretty easy one to try to predict. FlyQuest did take the series 2-1 in the regular season, but they are obviously coming in with quite a bit more momentum and talent than NRG is at the current moment. Your defending Summer Split champions are really just not doing all that well at the moment. Sneaking into the playoffs at 2-5 does not feel particularly good. The bottom section of the LCS, really after the top 3, all feels very wide open. It all feels pretty bad, but NRG somehow, some way of all of the teams in the playoffs feel the most off-kilter at the current moment. That's represented by them being 5 games below 500 in terms of their game score, and really only getting into the playoffs because the bottom 2 teams were that bad over the course of the entire split. I don't even know if right now NRG is better than Shopify Rebellion, who looked okay in the final weeks of the regular season. So, we'll talk about it, but, going through each team's roster for FlyQuest, of course, their lineup is looking like Bwipo in the top lane, Inspired in the jungle, Quad in the mid lane, Masu at AD carry, and Busio at support. And then for NRG, it's looking like Dokla in the top lane, Contracts in the jungle, Palafox in the mid lane, FBI at AD carry, and Huhi at support. Definitely an interesting matchup on paper, because if you had told me that this would be a matchup in the playoffs at the beginning of the split, I would have thought it would be rather interesting. I thought NRG was going to be able to bounce back and get some of their summer mojo back, but it's just not really happened. They've kind of fallen off the rails, and so when you go lane by lane, it's not exactly super favorable towards them. Where is the lane that I think they could get the advantage in? Well, I think a lot of it is going to be up to Contracts. I definitely think Inspired versus Contracts is going to be the most important matchup here, because when you're talking about what NRG does, a lot of it runs through the jungle. When Contracts is having a good game, when he's able to play as Maokai and Sejuani and actually be able to pressure a lot in the early game, then things go really well for Energy. I think, generally speaking, a team that, if you're familiar with the LPL, you can compare Energy to right now, at least in terms of playstyle, is Weibo Gaming. Obviously, they're not nearly as good. Like, I'm not trying to say that Energy is Weibo Gaming, but I think they play a very similar style of League of Legends, and it's around a player in Contracts who has always been like baby Tarzan in my brain. That's always kind of been the way that he has played the game. I think that that is a pretty apt comparison. You know, very aggressive early game junglers that often do it on facilitative tanks like Sejuani and Maokai. I think if Contracts is able to actually have good early games, and if a lot of his aggressive tendencies, you know, work, which I think it's not impossible to say, Inspired much more of a late game player in the jungle, likes to play things like Karthus, and typically speaking is going to play more for team fights and more for objectives than he is for early skirmishes. If Contracts can actually get away with a lot of his more aggressive plays in the early game, perhaps Energy actually has something to stand on. But when you're looking at the lane matchups, there's really nothing that stands out in a positive way. I think bot lane theoretically could be interesting. FBI and Huhi have probably been the least bad of the lanes in terms of the individual 1v1 or 2v2. That's not to say they've been good. They're significantly worse, not only than they were in spring, but definitely than they were last year and every other time they've played together. Both of them individually have played worse over the course of this split, and I think Masu and Busio have been getting better over the course of this year, which doesn't necessarily bode super well for the Energy bot lane, but Masu and Busio certainly aren't unbeatable by any means if FBI and Huhi can get a good matchup, and if they can get put in a decent position by Contracts, they should be talented enough to actually take advantage of that 2v2. It's just not really how that has played out over the course of this year. I would definitely say that's in favor of Fly. When you look at the mid lane, Quad is just kind of a better version of Palafox at the moment. Both of them are incredibly aggressive 1v1 oriented players. Neither of them are really macro oriented in terms of how they want to play the game. Both of them like to get their own resources and kind of leave the macro and the roaming to other players on the team. That was always the negative on Quad, and that's definitely been the case for Palafox over the course of this split. Unfortunately, again, for Energy and for Palafox, I think Quad is just better at that role. He's a better laner, and he's certainly more mechanically talented. Palafox might be able to generate some interesting advantages if he picks something like Yone and is able to get in some good matchups, but if this is just a quirky Tristana trade, I don't really see any way for Palafox to be able to outplay that and be better than Quad, and so I would say that that's in favor of FlyQuest. And then when you look at the top lane matchup, you know, neither of these players has been particularly consequential towards their team's success. You know, Bwipo gets all pro because there's nobody else that ends up getting it, but Dokla, you know, the numbers are actually okay in terms of his lane matchups. The problem is that he's just out of position all the time, and he's one of the more gankable top laners in the entire league. He really doesn't respect a lot of pressure from the enemy team, and if Inspired's going to do anything, he's gonna go top, and he's gonna try to salvage Bwipo's game. And so I don't feel particularly good about how that matchup ends up scaling out, even if I don't think it's going to be the most important. But again, really the matchup that matters is the jungle. If Inspired is able to get a ton of pressure and resources early for Fly, genuinely, I just don't see a world in which Energy could win a game in that scenario. But there is a situation, a scenario in which Contracts can actually be pretty okay in the early game, go into these mid games with like a 1 or a 2k gold lead, and then potentially they could open things up. That would probably be like a FlyQuest win, because they're just so much better at team fighting and 5v5ing to close out games. But you know, it's something for Energy, but it's almost entirely on Contracts, in my opinion, to be able to get this team any wins in this series, and I just don't believe that's going to happen. FlyQuest are big favorites in this one, and they probably should be. And then moving on to our second of the round 1 matchups, and this one to me is significantly closer on paper, especially after some of the recent changes. It's the number 4 seeded Dignitas taking on the number 5 seeded 100 Thieves, and I think these are two very intriguing teams to try to take a look at in terms of where they could be moving forward, because I think both have pretty incredible upside if things end up coming together for them, at the very least to compete for like being the number 4 team or trying to get into the top 3, but I don't think either have really actualized that at all over the course of this split. Both have had runs where they've been horrible, and both have had runs where they've been okay, and that's represented by the fact that they are both sitting at 3 and 4. Dignitas with a slightly better record coming into this. They certainly have a higher floor roster on paper, full of a ton of veterans that should be able to calm the storm in the playoffs and not get too rattled by the moment, but 100 Thieves certainly have a bit of an X factor now in the bot lane that I'm excited to talk about. But let's go over both of the lineups for Dignitas. Their lineup is looking like Licorice in the top lane, Spica in the jungle, Jensen in the mid lane, Sven at AD carry, and Isles at support. And then for 100 Thieves, their lineup is looking like Sniper in the top lane, River in the jungle, Quid in the mid lane, Tomo at AD carry, and Ayla at support. There is quite a bit of good, quite a bit of bad for both of these teams. I think some former teammates going head-to-head, of course, River and Licorice, two of the bigger pieces on Golden Guardians last year with their big rise. You've got Tomo taking on Isles. These are two players that played together the previous split on Dignitas as a starting bot lane. And a couple of interesting storylines going head-to-head here, and I'm really excited to see how that ends up working out. But when you talk about both of these teams and how they match up, again, it's really just going to be about which version of this team you get, and that counts for both of them. When you talk about Dignitas, how have they been able to win? Well, it's been through their carry duo. It's Jensen and Sven, and I'll be entirely honest, I'm going to say something very similar about 100 Thieves, but this is going to be a very mid lane, bot lane focused kind of series. I think if either team can establish pressure in both of those lanes, likely that will be the team that ends up dominating the series, but, you know, Jensen has really been the one to win in the late game. Sven has been kind of the consistent carry throughout the entirety of the game, but his highs just aren't as high as some of the other ADCs. I think both of them are integral when you're talking about how Dignitas likes to play the game. Traditionally speaking, Dignitas has been an org that has invested a bit more into early game laning. That's kind of been their calling card ever since they came back to the league, you know, acquiring Clutch Gaming, and that's kind of true here. I think you can look at some positives in terms of the 1v1 or 2v2, but generally I think early game definitely favors 100 Thieves a bit more. I think River is a better early game jungler right now than Spica is. I certainly think he's a lot more proactive on the map, even if that hasn't always shown through in the summer split, especially if you're looking at spring, and then obviously last year River more than has the track record to prove that he should be a better early game jungler. I think Tomo and Ayla should theoretically be the better 2v2, specifically in the bot lane. I think Quid is a very good 1v1 laner. Sniper is much more focused as a player on 1v1 laning. I think generally when you're looking at advantages in the early game, it's pretty much all 100 Thieves, but Dignitas should be better in the team fighting stage of the game. You're looking at players like Jensen and like Sven that are pretty elite level team fighters. Jensen in particular, I still consider to be close to elite in terms of team fighting, especially at the domestic level, and that's really where I think you're going to talk about the differences between these two teams. When you talk about lane by lane who has an advantage, it's really hard to separate quite a few of these players, because honestly these two teams are rather similar in terms of skill level and how they've performed, but it's really going to be up to the playstyle. Again, Licorice Sniper in the top lane. Licorice should have a higher floor, but he's really not achieved that floor over the course of this year. Sniper kind of similarly has like a really high upside, but the floor has not been there really, and so if you get a good performance out of either top laner, that could shift the series quite a bit. If Licorice plays really well, taking advantage of the young top laner, that could potentially be very bad for 100 Thieves, but Licorice hasn't exactly been like phenomenal, and if Sniper is actually able to get that mechanical brilliance off, that's going to be huge for 100 Thieves. Spica versus River I think is very intriguing. Honestly, I think River is the better jungler at the current moment, but he's really not been perfect. I mean, Spica certainly has not been perfect either. I think he's had quite a few bad games over the course of this split, but, you know, neither has exactly been ideal in terms of the consistency and the confidence you want going into the playoffs. Jensen and Quid, I think, are both kind of the swivel points for their team. I think Quid is more mechanically talented in terms of carrying the game on his own, and I think Jensen is more talented in terms of getting resources to everybody that needs them on his team, being able to leave lane and sacrifice resources in order to make things work specifically for his jungler. I think those are kind of the styles that you're looking at. Mid lane to me is very much the matchup of the series, and then bot lane you got Tomo and Ayla, who are very much focused on the 2v2. Tomo is a beast mechanically and honestly is one of the better 2v2 laners we have in North America. Jan, you know, esque if you will, in terms of the way he likes to play the game, which is why I was so high on him when he was on Dignitas last split, and why he's, I think, helped out this team a ton. Not that he's bad in the team fighting stage, just that he's definitely more of an early game focused guy. And Sven, who's much more of a jack of all trades, a very well-rounded AD carry, might not dominate the 2v2 as much, but is probably going to be a bit more consistent when he does have the resources going into late game. Both supports have been, you know, good at times, good, in small sample sizes, I guess is the way to put it, but both have also lost games for their individual teams. It's honestly very intriguing how close this matchup is on paper. I think if you asked me to make a prediction, you know, we'll see. We'll get to the bracket in just a second, but I really want to make it clear that I think this could actually go either way. I think if 100 Thieves got significantly better with the addition of Tomo, and if that bot lane is going to be able to perform very well, I think 100 Thieves is going to have the edge in this series. But if Dignitas is, you know, what they were the last time these two teams played against each other, which is just kind of a better version of 100 Thieves, then obviously they're going to have the edge. I hope this is a close series. Part of me believes that it's just going to be one or the other, like either Dignitas or 100 Thieves will end up dominating the other. I just don't know which one yet, but I think on paper both of these teams are actually pretty similar. All right, but that is going to do it for my LCS playoff primer video. We've gone over all the awards, we've gone over all the teams, even the first round matchups. It's time to get into my full bracket prediction. As a reminder, if you've skipped to this part of the video, please go watch the rest. Obviously, not just because of watch time, that's pretty good for the channel, but because, quite frankly, I want to make this clear, this bracket means nothing without the analysis that I've just given. This is not a binary bracket. I am very much expecting things to not go exactly as I'm putting it here. These are just my best guesses based off of matchups and based off of the context that I've given earlier on in the video. I really do, I want to make that point as abundantly clear as I possibly can, that the bracket out of context is gonna be wrong. It's wrong every year. There's at least one upset. It never goes according to plan. Sometimes I take a swing and I miss, and you know, if you want to know why I'm taking that swing, I'm gonna talk about it a bit here, but almost all of that conversation has already been had in the previous segments in this video, so please go watch that if you skipped here. But if you have watched the whole video, we are here at the full bracket prediction time, so let's get right into it. I'm going to be going through each series and, you know, kind of talking about why I think each team might win or might lose. So we'll start in the first round. We've already covered these series in terms of previewing it, so they're going to be a bit quicker. With Dignitas taking on 100 Thieves in the first series of the playoffs. Maybe shockingly, I have 100 Thieves picking up the win in this one. I don't think that you're going to see that from a lot of other analysts, but I honestly think these two teams are very evenly matched, and really the big difference maker to me is I really believe in Tomo as an AD carry. I think he's going to carry this team across the finish line, and I think he will win this series for them. So I have them winning this, and Dignitas will be moving down into the lower bracket. Again, I should also note, if you're not familiar with the LCS playoff format, it is changed. It is very different. This split, we've kind of pseudo brought back the gauntlet style format from the regional qualifiers in years past that Cloud9 is very famous for. Now, if you drop out of the upper bracket, you get kind of slotted into this gauntlet style depending on what your seed is. We'll talk about that a bit more as we move along, but the first round matchups are pretty easy because they both just slot into lower bracket round number 1, and Dignitas will be the first team to slot there for me. But in the other round 1 matchup, this one is way easier. This one is clearly FlyQuest on paper. If they lose this, it'll be a massive upset. One thing I do want to point out, though, nobody thought Energy was going to be winning the summer title when they went into playoffs last year. They really rose up and kind of surprised everyone. Same thing for Team Liquid. I honestly think both of those teams came into the playoffs looking quite bad, pretty lax in terms of their ability to play the game, not really consistent at all, and yet both of them were able to find their form and be able to get themselves a win in the playoffs. If you're looking for a miracle team this split, Energy might not be a horrible one to bet on. I don't think it will happen, but it is certainly something to point out that neither of the last two champions that we got were predictable really in any phase. And so certainly something to keep an eye on, but Energy, at least for me, going to go down. FlyQuest is just way too good. They are so much better than Energy on paper at the moment. But we are going to talk about our lower bracket round number 1 matchup next. Dignitas taking on Energy. One of these teams will be the first one eliminated from the bracket, from the playoffs, and from Worlds, and it will be Energy for me. Dignitas is going to pick up the victory. They're better, basically, in every conceivable way. If they lose this series, it's entirely on them. They are just more talented. They are more consistent than anything that Energy has to offer, and I believe in them significantly more. And so they are going to be moving on. If they underperform here, well, isn't that just the legacy of Dignitas, especially with all the rumors that this might be their last year? But they're going to be moving on to the next stage of the gauntlet. And then in the upper bracket, we've got Team Liquid taking on 100 Thieves. This one much easier to predict. I've got Team Liquid picking up the win. It would be a major upset if 100 Thieves was able to take down TL in a series, but I trust the TL boys. I think Impact into Snipers are really bad matchup for 100 Thieves, and as good as Quid has been, APA has really been one of the only mid laners that has been better than Quid, so I trust Team Liquid. I'm going to have them move on here. 100 Thieves is going to go down to the round 2 version of the lower bracket, because regardless of who loses between Cloud9 and FlyQuest, 100 Thieves would be the lower seed, which means they go to round 2. The higher seed goes to round 3. That's how it ends up working out. And so who is the team that will be going to that round number 3? Well, we've got Cloud9 taking on FlyQuest, one of the more intriguing matchups in the playoffs for me. I could really see this going either way, but I think Cloud9 is the better team, and so I'm going to have them move on here to winners finals. And by proxy, Team Liquid and Cloud9 are my first two teams to qualify for Worlds this year, as the worst that they can do is get top 3 from this spot, which is pretty good for them, all things considered. But Cloud9, I just think matches up rather favorably. I think generally what we just saw in the final week of the regular season gives me quite a bit of confidence that they know what they're doing, and especially if JoJo can actually play well. If he can be better than Quad, that's like a death sentence for Fly. I don't think they really have anything else on their roster that I feel confident in. So Cloud9 moving on, but we've still got some lower bracket things to go over. 100 Thieves taking on Dignitas here, and maybe you can say I'm hedging my bets. Maybe you can say that I'm not sticking to my guns, but I'm going to pick Dignitas in this one. I really do think these two teams are incredibly similar, and even if I had 100 Thieves going over in round number 1, take this as me saying I think this is closer to a 50-50 than anything else. I would be surprised if either team was able to really dominate, although, again, maybe the series ends up being a domination, but I think if you ask this team to play multiple different times, I genuinely think you would probably get 5 out of 10 from each, and that's my expectation. And so with 100 Thieves winning in the upper bracket, I have Dignitas winning in the lower bracket, not only because I want to represent that I think the series is so close, but also it gives us some more interesting series to talk about moving forward, and obviously I want to at least try to go over some things that we haven't necessarily seen yet, and so, you know, we'll talk about that there. But winners finals, who do I think is going to be moving to the grand finals, the championship, if you will? Team Liquid taking on Cloud9. I've got Team Liquid picking up the win here. I just think that they are too strong right now. 2 weeks ago, we saw what Team Liquid can do when they're absolutely at their best, and it's really hard for me to believe that that's not going to be the case. Thanatos has only really struggled against one guy in the back half of this split, and that is Impact, and I generally think that C9 just doesn't have the macro to be able to keep up with the consistency of TL at the current moment. So TL is going to be moving on to Grand Finals, C9 moving down into the semifinals, if you will, but who is going to be joining them? FlyQuest taking on Dignitas. This is the matchup we all kind of want to see, and especially in this instance, this is a Worlds qualifying series. The winner of this becomes the third and final team to qualify to Worlds out of the LCS, and for it to be Jensen versus Inspired and all the trash talk that's been talked about these two teams, this is the matchup I really wanted to highlight. I just don't think Dignitas is good enough. I have FlyQuest winning this. I would love for the story to be Dig winning, because FlyQuest obviously are playing the villains, and that would be quite a satisfying ending, but Fly is better than Dig, and I think they will be the third team representing the LCS at Worlds this year. I think if this was Cloud9, it would be even more of a win for them. I think they match up incredibly favorably into Dignitas, but FlyQuest, I think, definitely gets the job done. They move into the semifinals to take on Cloud9, and just like before, I have Cloud9 picking up the win here. I just think they're the better team. I honestly don't think Fly and C9 are guaranteed like on the same tier of team. Perhaps they are. Perhaps this is a scenario in which it's a lot closer to being 50-50, but I'm going to stick with my guns, and I'm going to trust my gut on Cloud9 that they're going to be able to figure it out here in the summer playoffs and make the summer finals. But do I have enough confidence in them to say that in a big moment after picking up another win over FlyQuest that they can take down Team Liquid? I don't have the guns to say that. I think Team Liquid is going to be my pick to win the LCS. The undefeated split ends up wrapping in an undefeated year, or I guess an undefeated split entirely, including the playoffs, with them not dropping a single series here, just going from winner's bracket to champions. And honestly, if any team's going to take down TL, I think it'll be C9. I think they have the best matchup into TL, but it's just hard to predict against TL. Now, if C9 can come online, if JoJo has a great playoffs, and if you're still getting the same kind of performance out of Berserker and Vulcan, C9 should be able to beat Team Liquid. It's just really hard to predict that when that's not really what we've seen so far from C9 this split. So I have TL picking up the championship, but I'm probably much higher on Cloud9 than a lot of other analysts. Let me know if you agree or disagree with that down in the comments section below. But that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only post about the LCS, although we will be covering everything in the playoffs moving forward. We post about all 4 of the major regions. That's the LEC, LCK, and LPL, as well as the NACL, Tier 2 here in North America. So if you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL esports, especially with Worlds right around the corner, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all